The year is 1828. A chill wind whips through the narrow cobbled streets of Edinburgh's Westport district. The air is thick with an unsettling quiet, broken only by the occasional distant cry or the rustle of leaves in the wind. The stench of poverty and decay hangs heavy in the air. The buildings once grand now stand as crumbling testaments to better days long past. Trash litters the alleyways, and the few souls who dare to venture out at this hour do so with hurried steps and wary glances. The fog, thick and clinging, seems to swallow the gaslight, plunging the winds into an eerie gloom. The gas lamps, meant to provide some semblance of safety, only cast long, haunting shadows that dance and flicker with every gust of wind. It is a place of shadows and whispers, where life is cheap and death comes all too frequently. The residents, hardened by years of hardship, know better than to trust the darkness. They speak in hushed tones, sharing tales of misfortune and woe. Yet even by the standards of this impoverished district, a recent string of deaths has cast a pall over the winds. The frequency and nature of these deaths have left the community in a state of perpetual fear and suspicion. Bodies, some bearing strange marks, others simply still and cold, appear with alarming regularity. Each discovery sends ripples of dread through the community, as families mourn and neighbors whisper of dark forces at play. Fear, like the fog, seeps through the community. It clings to the walls of the tenements, invades the dreams of the children, and casts a shadow over every interaction. The people huddle together, seeking solace in numbers, but finding little comfort in the face of the unknown. Whispers of resurrection men, and worse, circulate in hushed tones. The tales of body snatchers who steal the dead for profit are enough to keep even the bravest souls indoors after dark. But there are darker rumors still, of men who do not wait for death to claim their victims. Little do the residents of Westport know, a darkness far more sinister than grave robbers haunts their midst. This is a darkness born not of superstition, but of cold, calculated malice. Two men, William Burke and William Hare, have turned murder into a gruesome trade. They are not driven by desperation or madness, but by greed. Their victims are chosen not for any personal vendetta, but for the simple fact that their bodies can be sold for a profit. The darkness that shrouded Edinburgh's Westport was not merely physical. It was a darkness that had seeped into the very soul of the district, a reflection of the poverty, desperation, and vice that festered within its heart. The people, already burdened by their own struggles, now faced a threat that was both unseen and unimaginable. It was a darkness that had seeped into the very soul of the district, a reflection of the poverty, desperation, and vice that festered within its heart. The people, already burdened by their own struggles, now faced a threat that was both unseen and unimaginable. The very air seemed to vibrate with a sense of impending doom, as if the city itself was aware of the horrors lurking within its streets. It was in this breeding ground of despair that two men, unremarkable in life, would forge a bond of blood and profit that would etch their names in the annals of history's most depraved. Their actions would not only bring terror to the streets of Edinburgh, but would also leave a lasting scar on the collective memory of the city. The tale of Burke and Hare is one of greed, betrayal, and the darkest depths of human nature, a grim reminder of what can happen when the value of life is measured in coin. William Hare, a man of low character and even lower morals, ran a lodging house in the heart of Westport. His establishment was a place where the light of hope barely flickered, much like the dim candles that struggled to illuminate the squalid rooms. The walls, stained with years of neglect, echoed the silent cries of its inhabitants. His establishment was a haven for the destitute, the desperate, and the drunk. Those who had nowhere else to turn found themselves at Hare's door, seeking refuge from the harsh realities of life. The lodging house was a melting pot of misery, where the downtrodden and the broken sought solace in the company of fellow sufferers. Among his unfortunate tenants was an old man, ill and owing back rent. This man, frail and withered by time, had once been a robust figure, but now he was a shadow of his former self. His coughs echoed through the thin walls, a constant reminder of his impending demise. Death, it seemed, offered the only escape from Hare's ruthlessness. The old man knew that his days were numbered, and with each passing moment, the grip of death tightened around him. The other tenants watched with a mix of pity and fear, knowing that they too could one day find themselves in his position. However, when the old man finally succumbed to his illness, Hare saw not a tragedy, but an opportunity. His eyes, once filled with disdain for the old man's inability to pay, now gleamed with a sinister idea. The death of the lodger was not the end, but rather the beginning of a dark scheme. He enlisted the help of his friend, William Burke, a man whose moral compass was as askew as his companions. Burke, always eager for a quick profit, listened intently as Hare laid out his plan. The two men, bound by their greed and lack of scruples, formed a partnership that would soon become infamous. Together, they hatched a plan as cold and calculating as the grave itself. The graveyards of Edinburgh were filled with fresh corpses, but the demand for bodies in the medical schools was insatiable. Burke and Hare saw an opportunity to turn death into profit, and they were willing to go to any lengths to achieve their goal. The deceased lodger, a burden in life, became a commodity in death. Wrapped in a shroud, his lifeless body was no longer a source of debt, but a potential source of income. The two men moved with a sense of purpose, their actions driven by the promise of financial gain. Burke and Hare, eyes gleaming with ill-gotten gain, transported the body through the darkened streets, avoiding the watchful gaze of the night watchman. The city, shrouded in darkness, provided the perfect cover for their nefarious activities. Every shadow seemed to conspire with them, hiding their movements from prying eyes. Their destination was a place that promised not salvation, but cold, hard cash. The medical schools, always in need of fresh cadavers for dissection, were willing to pay handsomely for bodies. Burke and Hare knew that as long as they could supply the demand, their pockets would never be empty. The old man's death was just the beginning of a dark and profitable enterprise. The doors of Surgeon's Square held no fear for Burke and Hare. These doors, which might have seemed ominous to others, represented opportunity to them. Inside, amidst the pungent odor of formaldehyde and the clinking of surgical instruments, the air was thick with the promise of scientific discovery and the grim reality of death. Resided men of science, men eager to unlock the secrets of the human body. These were men who saw cadavers not as the remnants of life, but as keys to understanding the mysteries of human anatomy. One such man was Dr. Robert Knox, a prominent anatomist with a seemingly insatiable appetite for cadavers. Knox, however, was particular. He was a man driven by a relentless pursuit of knowledge, and his standards were exacting. He demanded fresh specimens, bodies untouched by the ravages of decay. For Knox, the fresher the body, the more valuable it was for his anatomical studies. It was a demand that the graveyards, with their limited supply of the recently deceased, struggled to meet. The natural process of death and decay could not keep pace with the voracious needs of the anatomy schools. Burke and Hare, sensing a lucrative opportunity, offered Knox the corpse of the old lodger. They saw in Knox's need a chance to turn death into profit. The transaction was swift, the payment generous. Knox, eager to continue his work, did not ask questions. He simply paid for the body, grateful for the fresh specimen. A ghastly business partnership was born. This was not just a one-time deal, but the beginning of a dark and profitable enterprise. £7 and 10 shillings. It was a sum that, in those days, represented a small fortune. For Burke and Hare, it was more money than they had ever seen. That was the price of a life in the anatomy theaters of Edinburgh. In these theaters, the dead were dissected and studied, their bodies serving as the foundation for medical knowledge. For Burke and Hare, it was a sum that kindled a horrifying ambition. They realized that the old lodger was just the beginning. There were many more bodies to be had and many more pounds to be earned. The old lodger, they realized, was not a singular opportunity, but the first in a potential procession of profit. They began to see every lodger, every lonely soul, as a potential source of income. The line between life and death blurred, and the value of human life was reduced to mere currency in their eyes. Emboldened by their success, Burke and Hare graduated from scavenging corpses to creating them. The winds, teeming with the vulnerable and the desperate, became their hunting ground. Their victims, a drunkard stumbling home after a night of revelry, a sickly woman coughing in a doorway, a young boy separated from his parents in the crowded marketplace. Each life, insignificant to the world at large, represented another coin in the pockets of the murderous duo. Their method, as cold and calculated as their motives, became known as Burking. No rope, no blade, no outward sign of violence. Just strong hands clamping over the mouth and nose, suffocating the life out of their victims, leaving the corpses unmarked, perfect for the dissecting table. Section 5. Whispers in the Winds. Word of the disappearances spread through the winds like a foul wind. Mothers clutched their children a little tighter, Suspicious eyes followed strangers, and whispers of Burke and Hare were spoken in hushed tones. Yet, fear was a luxury the residents of Westport could ill afford. Survival, not suspicion, was their priority. And so, the murders continued, each one pushing Burke and Hare further into the abyss of their own depravity. The disappearances, once easily dismissed as misfortunes in a city rife with hardship, began to take on a sinister pattern. The victims, always poor, always vulnerable, vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. As the grim deeds of Burke and Hare escalated, the city began to whisper of the mysterious disappearances. The doctors, oblivious to the origins of the bodies, continued their work, driven by the thirst for knowledge. Little did they know, they were entangled in a web spun by devils. Eventually, the law caught up with the notorious duo. The streets buzzed with the news of their capture. Justice, though slow, was inevitable. The trial was swift, and the evidence overwhelming. Burke and Hare, once feared, now faced the consequences of their heinous acts. Amidst the darkness, there was a glimmer of hope. The trial and subsequent punishment of Burke and Hare served as a stark warning. The city, scarred but resilient, began to heal. People took solace in the fact that justice, though delayed, had prevailed. Yet, the shadow of Burke and Hare lingered long after their demise. Their story, a chilling reminder of human greed and moral decay, echoed through the halls of history. The city, forever marked by their crimes, vowed to never forget the lessons learned from the horrors of Burke and Hare.